Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Maynard Costerson's Nonprofit Education Series. Today, we'll be talking about board diversity considerations for nonprofits, and we're so happy to have you here. Few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. Everyone will be muted during the webinar. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and I will be monitoring that, and we will have some time at the end to answer your questions. Today, I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Kelley Kuhn, the President and CEO of the Michigan Nonprofit Association. The Michigan Nonprofit Association is a charitable organization dedicated to nonprofits and the communities they serve by promoting equal rights and social justice. M&A, under Kelley's lead, helps nonprofits advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusivity. With that, I would like to turn it over to Kelley to start her presentation.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Just want to make sure that the slides are set up correctly and that everybody can see them. So looks good. All right. Thumbs up. Appreciate that. Great. Well, I'm thrilled to be here this morning to talk about two things that I care deeply about: nonprofits and the boards that govern them. But before I dive into both of those topics, I would like to thank the team at Maynard Costerson for their commitment to supporting nonprofits and the clients they serve through the Nonprofit Education Series. I'm honored to be part of it, and I hope I can play a small role in building the capacity of nonprofits in the audience, as well as raise awareness for why nonprofit board diversity is an absolute must. So you've heard a little bit about me, but I'd like to share a little bit more about the Michigan Nonprofit Association. So we were founded in 1990. We are a 501c3 organization ourselves, and our mission is to strengthen the collective voice, leadership, and capacity of nonprofits to enrich the lives of all Michiganders. We are a membership organization, and we proudly serve 750 members. And through our various communication channels, we are reaching over 50,000 individuals. We provide advocacy for the sector, training, technology services, and we have a legacy commitment to engaging community through our civic and community participation efforts. So that's a little bit about M&A. Before we get into, again, the topic at hand, I want to ground us a little bit in some information about Michigan's nonprofit sector. I always like to start with the economic impact data about Michigan. So what you can see here is that in Michigan, based on IRS data from 2021, there are more than 53,000 nonprofits registered in the state of Michigan. Charitable nonprofits, which is who we represent and work closely with, is just under that 42,000 mark. We employ nearly 470,000 people. That's almost 11% of Michigan's workforce. And we hold assets of nearly $268 billion, and 44% of those are tied to our charitable nonprofits. And we spend more than $90 billion in revenue each year. So when we talk about nonprofit boards, it is this that we are talking about, this sector here. So as I thought about preparing to talk about this conversation and topic a little bit more, I really wanted to share some data and information that we have at the association. We believe and know that nonprofit organizations play an important role in building healthy communities and providing vital services that contribute to both economic stability and mobility. Combined with our relationships and our deep local knowledge, it really means that nonprofits deeply understand better than anyone the community's needs and our best ways to meet those needs. Our nonprofit leaders are also often the voice of the people that they serve. So recent years, we know we've lived through turmoil, and it has been and has had effect on our nonprofits, whether it was the global pandemic, racial uprising, educational attainment, workforce issues, inflation, and other economic impacts. We know our nonprofits have continued to support our most vulnerable through it all. But in addition to understanding these effects and what was happening in communities, we also really wanted to better understand who's leading these organizations. What is the makeup of that? And how do we help amplify their work? So given, again, how vital nonprofits are, we partnered with our friends at Data Driven Detroit and at the Dorothy A. Johnson Center for Philanthropy. And what we did was we created the first comprehensive data set regarding the demographics of nonprofit leadership across the state. On this slide, and I can certainly provide the link more directly, is access to the whole report and the highlights of what the report showed. But I'm just going to cover a few things about this before we get into the topic of diversity of board. The joint report identified the percentage of BIPOC, that is our Black, Indigenous, and people of color nonprofit leaders statewide, to give us a clear understanding of the racial and ethnic composition of our staff members, our boards, and our leaders. We focused on 6 regions: Lakeshore, West Michigan, Metro Detroit, Mid-State, Central Michigan, South Central Michigan, tip of the Mitt, and the Upper Peninsula. What we saw was that the lack of diversity we've consistently seen in the nonprofit sector is a major concern for those organizations providing services and advocacy, primarily in our communities of color and among those groups whose mission is aimed at promoting race equity. Since the lack of diversity can interfere with communication and hamper efforts to address racial inequality, this mismatch can undercut trust among communities nonprofit serves. Further, the survey not only identified what was happening in our urban centers, but it also identified the unique needs that are happening all over rural Michigan, which is important as well. And we know that this information will continue to help guide community-level engagement and understanding of how to best support these communities. So what did the data start to tell us? The first slide is taking a look at the age of our executive directors, for example. So in Michigan, over half of the executive directors responding to this survey reported 55% are between the ages of 45 and 64. There are also executive directors under 18 years old, or there are no executive directors under 19 years old, and less than 1% are under the age of 25. The average executive director in the BIPOC-led organizations is slightly younger than our directors in our white-led organizations, and almost 2/5 of the directors, that's 36%, in the BIPOC-led organizations are aged less than 45, which is almost twice the number of the directors in the same age group in the white-led organizations. The percentage of executive directors nearing and over the retirement age also reveals an important thing that we all need to be paying attention to with regard to our nonprofits, which is succession planning and the leadership pipeline. Similar to other sectors, we are experiencing workforce shortages, and this data here is an indicator of something that boards should be mindful of, which is succession planning for their leadership, but also in this topic, succession for them as board members is also just as important. When we take a look at the next slide here, what we're showing is really how nonprofit executives are identifying. And what you can see here is that among the respondents, executive directors are more likely to identify as women in nonprofit organizations, with 64% of the directors identifying as women, which is almost twice the number of directors identifying as men. And you can see that is the case in the white-led organizations as well as the BIPOC-led organizations. And we also have about 1% identifying as non-binary or genderqueer, and no executive directors identified as transgender. When we take a look at the racial and ethnicity overview, as you can see on this slide, you can see that a majority of around 74%, 73%, just shy of that 74% mark, are identifying as white. When we take a look at the board membership, as is the case in the next slide here, at the state level, our boards are predominantly composed of members also identifying in the white category, just slightly under the percentage of our staff members, our executive directors. And 18% are identifying in the Black African American category, as well as 3% in our Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx. And also identifying other ones that were also part of the survey as well. When we take a look at this slide here, we take a closer look at the distribution of racial and ethnic identities. The majority of organizations reported that they identify, at least in part, as, so when we look here, you can see that about half of the organizations, 56%, report a mixed race board, which means on their boards, based on the information and the way that the questions were asked, there are at least one board member identifying as white and at least one identifying as BIPOC. About a third of the organizations, 30%, report no board members identifying as BIPOC. What's interesting about this first time survey that we did with this information is that we also got feedback indicating that this data is also incomplete for some of those that completed the survey for us, because a lot of the organizations do not collect this information on their boards. So that's also an important piece in thinking about diversity of your board, is whether or not you understand all of the ways in which you could define diversity, whether again through this presentation it's based on age, race, ethnicity, or gender. However, and whatever you're measuring in that space, an issue could be that you're actually not tracking that information to really understand the diverse aspects of the board. And we found that again in this first time survey opportunity, that many had had an issue filling out the information with regard to that. Again, because we were looking at the leadership and the makeup of organizations across the state, we not only wanted to understand what was the board makeup and what was the leadership makeup of the organizations, but we also wanted to better understand what were their staff makeups. And again, if you've been following the 3 slides, this is the 3rd slide that looks just like this, you can see that staff actually begin to become more diverse in their reporting than the board and the executive directors. And what you have here is showing that 55% are identifying as white, with almost a third of the identities reported for staff members in the Black, African American at the 27%, and 6% in the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and Latinx. So again, what we start to see is this shift in the makeup of our leadership becoming much more diverse at the staff level than it is on the executive director as well as on the board level. So just wanted to share a bit of information. Again, the full report is available and the link is in the slide deck, and we can certainly get that link directly to you. We did not cover everything that's in the report, but it is a really great and fascinating report around the makeup of the leadership of Michigan's nonprofit sector. So when we think about all of that information and we think about the topic of board diversity, why does it matter? It matters because Michigan and our communities are becoming more diverse, with all of the state's population growth estimated in the next 20 to 30 years coming from populations of color. Also, and many of you are probably experiencing this in your own organizations, Gen Z is in the workforce now, and that makes 5 generations in the workforce at the same time. Also, we have had, as I indicated in some of my opening remarks, a lot of societal changes, right? Society is ever evolving. But when we think about the societal changes and where we are, we think about the fact that representation does matter. We also, again, ground this as thinking about nonprofit boards. And nonprofits, we are known for serving community. We are known for caring for community. In our history and in our DNA, we empower community. And again, we are here to improve lives for all communities. We truly exist for the public good. And when you think about diversity of your board, being equity focused is understanding inequities and how they affect society is so important, especially again in the work of nonprofits. We fill gaps, we help our most vulnerable, and we need to understand equity and how we diversify our boards so that we don't perpetuate inequities and that we actually create opportunities to deepen our impact as nonprofits, our relevance, so that we could advance the public good. But also, it's really important that nonprofit organizations and board members themselves begin to recognize that exceptional boards know this is essential to its evolution, to its growth, and to its strategy and its overall plan for impact. And lastly, as the data showed, that supporting our leaders and supporting our diverse staff makeup is really key and important. And so when we think about why diversity among boards is so important, is all of this as to why it all matters. But let's dive in a little bit further and talk about what happens when you have a diverse board. When you have a diverse board, you have enhanced decision-making. Diverse boards bring together individuals with a wide range of skills and talents, varied perspectives and experiences, and a culture that accepts that, celebrates that diversity. It enables you to have more comprehensive problem solving and strategic planning. Board members from diverse backgrounds often bring a wealth of experiences and cultural insights, which can be very helpful, especially when you think about engaging and inviting board members who are in your stakeholder or in those that you are providing direct services to. Think about how powerful it is to have that insight from somebody who's receiving what you're providing in and around the board table and offering that perspective. These experiences enrich the discussions and the decision-making. They foster creativity and innovative solutions. We saw that firsthand. The pandemic did that for a lot of our nonprofits. A great example is many of our nonprofits would have their clients and those they served coming to them. And in the pandemic, we had to make immediate pivots. And we saw this happen among our nonprofits, where our nonprofits were collectively thinking about where they take the services to those that they are trying to impact. And again, when you're in that space of a major decision of that, those that are receiving the services, as an example, to diversify your board from that perspective could be really helpful as you think about that. Again, these experiences enrich the conversations. We benefit from the wisdom in addressing unique needs of community. So again, when we think about representation and voice from those that we're serving, it's really key. And again, nonprofits with more diverse perspectives and welcoming environments that create space for all those perspectives to be thought out, create more well-rounded and informed decisions. When we go and think about nonprofits and we think about trust and credibility, again, if we are there for the public good, trust among board members is enhanced when individuals with diverse backgrounds collaborate, creating and fostering a culture of respect and openness. It truly is practicing in that space, in that moment, an opportunity to welcome and hear and create space for all of those experiences and those backgrounds, especially as it relates to the major and significant decisions nonprofit boards make often. So again, thinking about that, and trust, as we all know with anything, is the foundation, right? So building a foundation of trust first, that then again welcomes the opportunity and creates space for all of those perspectives. We do know that when it comes to trust and credibility, we have better connections with more diverse boards. When the board reflects the diversity of the community it's serving, the organization is able to access resources and community, such as collaborative partners. Again, as we saw in the time and in the space with the pandemic in particular, we saw partnerships and collaborations forming quickly. And they had to, because what we saw was the demand for nonprofit services was doubling and tripling within the weeks of those beginning days of the pandemic. And it was those trusted relationships and collaborations and community that allowed for people to get what they needed in a time of crisis. Also, when we think about it reflecting your organizational mission and your core values, a diverse board can serve as a powerful symbol of an organization's commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. It also demonstrates beyond just the value of talking about this being important, and allows you to put into action your commitment and your alignment to mission and vision. And lastly, this also continues to enhance the credibility and the reputation that a nonprofit would have in the communities that it serves, especially if that community is diverse in its makeup. But when we think about operating in the space of trust and credibility, when we think about it in the space of decision making, it's more than that in regards to diversity for the board. It's also thinking about creating space where you are creating a culture of inclusion and belonging. So when we are recruiting, that's really just the first step. When we recruit and we welcome diverse board members, we are again creating a process where, in a space where thought is given to a culture of inclusion and belonging. And it's important at all levels. Again, if we go back to the data of looking at how diverse our leadership is in our leadership and in our staff makeup, when we're thinking about creating a culture of inclusion, it really truly is at all levels of the organization. And especially with staff, a diverse board does send a strong message, especially to members of staff who are in the BIPOC community, that the organization does value diversity and inclusion. Again, representation matters. And at a time when we are competing amongst our sector, our nonprofit sector, as well as other sectors for talent, this is really important, especially when we want to get the best talent for the work that we are doing. It is really important to think about the message that is being sent when a staff member who will look at this information as they consider you for employment is looking at who is making the decisions around the board table. Also, it can identify where problems may be overlooked in a board that may be mostly made up of all white individuals, especially if an organization is serving in a community that is much more diverse. It ensures that the organization efforts are more attuned to the community's actual needs. Again, that voice and that space, and really understanding that lived experience for those that the nonprofit may be serving. Also, diverse boards can ensure that services are accessible to all, regardless of culture or socioeconomic differences. It's really important when we think about that perspective that can be brought to the table. And what I love about thinking about a culture of inclusion and belonging, it's not just a culture around the board table. It's not just a culture within the organization. It is about transformative change that happens in the policy space as well, and in the advocacy space that most nonprofits find themselves either advocating on behalf of their missions, but more importantly, advocating on behalf of the people that they serve. Again, that voice of community. And when we have diverse boards and diverse perspectives, we can advocate for inclusive policies. We can look at that in our outreach efforts, and we can have programs that accommodate diverse needs, especially in our BIPOC communities as well. So where do you begin, right? I always like to engage in presentations when I'm learning about something new, or even just getting friendly reminders about something. I always like to know, so I know what you're talking about. I know why it's important, but where do I begin? So it's important to agree, first and foremost, that our nonprofit sector needs more diversity, as is evident from our data set that we showed at the top of the presentation, as is evident when we think again about where nonprofit intersects in community and how it supports the needs of community. So agreeing that we need more diversity is really, I think, the first and foremost thing to think about. I think the other thing is really looking at the correlation between your mission, your strategy, and your composition. So how are you thinking about board diversity as it relates to your overall strategy and your overall goals? This is also a really important aspect to be thinking about. So there's a lot of reflection that happens ultimately before you begin to take the steps and what do you do next. Then I think you can focus inward and really think about understanding the needs of your board and understanding what do you currently exist as and where do you desire to be? What is your desired state? So we at the association have undergone a board transformation, and we are in the midst of it again. And one of the first things that we did was assessed where is our current board makeup. And we looked at demographic things, just like in the slides at the beginning. What's the average age? What's the makeup from a gender perspective? What's the makeup of experience in the nonprofit? Do we have voice of the nonprofits that we represent through our membership? All of those things came into play, and we determined that this was what our demographics look like. And then we took a look at gaps. And what we said was, wow, we are really needing, for instance, in our case, geography. We represent nonprofits all over Michigan, and we had gaps where we were missing, including with our friends in the Upper Peninsula. And now through a truly strategic and transformative process, we have onboarded six new board members this past summer, including representation from the Upper Peninsula. But without focusing inward and understanding what we had, what we wanted, and where we needed to go to get that, I don't know that we may have identified that as being such an important attribute that we were looking for. And that's just an example. And then you got to communicate. So for us, we did something a little radically different than most recruitment efforts happen. And we did a public call for application to join our board. So we really wanted to broaden the opportunity for people. And what we heard through the process, those who went on to be the 6 new board members that were part of the new class, as well as those who expressed interest. Many of them were shocked that they could apply. Oftentimes our boards might be seen as closed off to members of community, and it's secret how we recruit. And what we really wanted to do was take a radical approach to actually doing a public call. And we were really pleased. And it really did, based on the attributes we were looking for, we were really successful in getting an amazing candidate pool to pick from. And it was really challenging. And in the end, we landed 6 new board members as part of that process. So really, again, just understanding where your needs are, communicating that this is what you're desiring. Transparency is really important. And then go out and recruit. But again, creating that culture of inclusion is not just the flavor of the month. It is not just about saying this is what you want, recruiting and then getting those individuals with those attributes. It's going back to that slide around creating a culture of inclusion, is creating a space where all perspectives are welcomed and creating the opportunities for people to do that. So in addition to thinking about where do you begin, how do you start next, I always like to share resources as well, and not just M&A's resources. Here are resources on nonprofit board diversity. The first link that you will see here is to Board Source, which is an amazing resource. And this particular link will actually take you to other journals and other articles around board diversity, which I thought was really helpful. But I also want to share an important resource that is tied back and works closely with the Michigan Nonprofit Association, and that is our Capacity Building Centers network here. They are on our website as well, and this is a group of individuals whose mission is to help nonprofits succeed, and a lot of them focus and dive deep into board and board governance. And so if you're looking to take that next step and think about that, these are great resources. Many of them are in your own backyard and can really help take your board governance to the next level. And the rest are journals and other places to go to really find more information about this topic. So the last slide here is my contact information. Also, I mentioned our reach. This is where you can sign up for our newsletter, but also follow us on social, and all of that is available here as well. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions that may arise around the presentation.
Thank you, Kelley. First, I wanted to mention that I did put the link to the census link that you had in your presentation into the chat. So there was quite a few people that were very happy to have received that directly. One question, how did you, I know you mentioned doing some recruiting like an open call, but how did you go about the recruiting process?
Yeah, so what we did it a couple ways. One, we put on our website, we list our board members, and above our board members at the time we were recruiting, we actually put that we were the call for applications. So there was a part of our website that had that linked to all of the information anybody would need to know about what we were looking for, what we were about, what was our commitment to diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice, what are our values, as well as a quick form that they could fill out to give us some more information. So that was step number one. And then from that candidate pool, our board governance committee, who was tasked with this, then narrowed the pool down, and we did conversations with about 15 individuals and then narrowed that down to 6. And that's really the process that we used for that. We also sent it out through our social media channels. So LinkedIn, Facebook, and other things really helped broaden the reach. And it was just a really, really great process.
Thank you. Well, what a great presentation this was, Kelley. There's been multiple people in the chat that have noted what a great presentation this was. And we thank you for all that great information. Like you said, you know, you can give all this information, but then where do you start? And you gave some great techniques on where to start when it comes to, you know, diversifying your board and your executive area. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Tomorrow we will be emailing out a recording of this presentation. Our contact information will be in that email. And if you have additional questions after this, you can feel free to reach out. Actually, one question just came through, so we have a couple minutes, so I think I'll do it. I'll go ahead and ask it. How do you ensure, let me scroll up. How do you ensure candidates that the reason they are, how do you ensure the candidates that the reason that they are selected is because of their credentials, not their skin color?
That's a great question. So I think it's important. So again, when we recruited, we were transparent and asked demographic information that was important to us, right? So we wanted for people to let us know race, ethnicity, and other things in that space, age. Like, we were just transparent about it. Like, that was important to us. But we also asked other questions around alignment to our values, around experience that people had. So we had some things that were related to demographic needs, but we also had other things, like we needed somebody with strong financial background. We needed somebody who had interest in other subject areas that we did not have that expertise in there. And so it's, again, important to get that information and have open, honest conversation. And understand all of what somebody is bringing in. That's about creating a culture of inclusion, is really truly understanding and talking about all of the attributes that somebody brings in addition to honoring skin color and other things that are important in diversifying board as well.
Yeah, that sounds great, being open and honest right from the start. I have one last question. What do you recommend around changing pronouns and bylaws to be more inclusive? For example, moving from she or he to they.
In bylaws. That's interesting. So the questions, and so the bylaws are the governing document of the organization. So that's an interesting question. Because I don't know that I've experienced it in the bylaws of the governing board as much as I have experienced it more in the practice of staff and thinking about that. But so I don't have a response as it relates to the bylaws specifically, but certainly could try to provide additional resources in that space or do a little bit more homework on my end to understand how that's showing up in the governance space. Most of my experience has really been through the staff side of things.
Thank you. And I think that was our last question. So just want everyone to know that next month, our topic will be about best practices for preparing for an audit. So some audit best practices, audit prep best practices. So please keep your eyes peeled for communications regarding that. And I want to thank Kelley again for being our guest speaker today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.